So I start presumably from the beginning. um, so I think the last was you maybe discussed the three the three types of companies that are supposed to get some state anti-corona crisis support: SMEs, strategic important companies, and companies that are working in the heavily affected industries. So how you find out whether or not you are in one of the three groups? For SMEs, we'll talk to this later. There is a register. For strategic important company, it works as follows. You There is a letter of the Ministry of Economic Development that establishes criteria by which companies per industry sector are put on this list. Normally, it's based on employee and revenue. So, if you are over a certain revenue and over certain employees, you can be put on this list. And if you and it works like that, each industry sector ministry, based on this letter of the Ministry of Economic Development, will set up a list of strategic relevant companies. The company on the list are named by name and ENN by tax number, so there is no activity code related to it. Uh, if you look at heavily affected industries, then this is the legislative basis is постановление of the government of the Russian Federation from the 2nd of April. I mean, here you have 10 industry sectors, and each industry sector is related to an activity code, which is the общее российский классификатор видов экономической деятельности. I give you an example. If you are, say, you are an airline, you should have an activity code of 49. This is mentioned in this постановление, and if you are have your activity code in your registration documents, then you are part of the industry of which is heavily affected by the current crisis. A last comment is that regarding this question, currently there is a Законопроект going on that says that if we have a Russian company that is held by the majority with foreign capital, then this company is going to be excluded from the list of to put on the list of the strategically important companies, even if you meet the criteria. Currently, there are several some companies with foreign capital on the list, like IKEA, like McDonald's, like Adidas, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Ehrmann, Hochland, to name some, Volkswagen, to name some. These would all be excluded. So, and there's another last thing to mention: how do we find the current government official? Normally, you know in which kind of industry you are working, and normally you should know that which ministry is observing your industry you're working on, and this ministry is your first point of contact. You get in touch with the ministry and find out whether you will meet the criteria and how to possibly come on the list either of strategic important companies or heavily affected industries. So this is first question. Second question, please. I'm a shareholder of a Russian SME, but I'm not sure if I can receive governmental support. If yes, I cannot receive the support with other options for short-term financial cost cutting. Do you see, considering that I would like to keep a full staff employed after the crisis, but need to temporarily decrease salaries and rent to survive as my business is stopped? How can this be done in practice? So if you are registered SME as per SME legislation, then indeed there are some sort of basket of subsidies you can choose from, to put it that way. First is the the subsidy for salary higher than the monthly minimum salary of 12,000 rubles. For this, you get a salary up to the monthly minimum salary. You can apply for it directly on the website of the FNS. Then what else? You get a 50% cut of your social security contributions, down from 30 to 15%. Next is you can, if you're heavily affected and you have a drop of income, there are certain criteria. You get either an installment or the deferral of your tax payments. If you are in Moscow, you can, and the Moscow city is your landlord, you can apply of a 50% cut of your lease payment. Also, you get a temporary holiday for a property tax. As it goes for financing, you can apply for a loan for your salary payment. The maximum amount is calculated number of employees times monthly minimum salary times months of the credit. You can apply for this currently only via Sberbank and VTB Bank, the both are the state bank companies. You can apply for a restructuring credit. That means that if you have a credit that is currently with an interest rate higher than 6%, you can restructure that credit with an interest rate not more than 6%. This is in short what what you can do. How does this be done in practice? You apply to your bank. If it is a restructuring credit, there is a short practice in place where when you apply and the bank does not reject your claim within 10 days, then the application is granted. This is the answer, more detailed answer to the second question. Third question, please. Third question, this is from my colleague.
Okay, hello. So the third question is, so if I'm a director of an OOO providing services in Russia with 100% foreign capital, in April we were still thinking that it was possible to survive without cutting staff, but now we see that the current do not pay and we lack new ones, and therefore we are thinking of staff reduction. Is there any type of profession or employees that are easier to cut, and are there any protected ones? Is it possible to let the protected ones go? So several questions put into one, which have a highly practical implication now, and is similar to many questions that we receive these days. So, which instruments basically does an employer have in order to reduce costs and cut personnel? Of course, this everything is regulated by the Russian labor code. And there is, as you can imagine, a certain category of people who are protected. So if we speak about disabled persons, or fear I have some difficulties here. Okay. So in that case, these are people you cannot just reduce per se with the ordinary procedures. So here you have to find specific agreements with them. So by mutual agreement, it is always possible to find a solution. But of course, those who are under certain protected categories, they will have to be paid much more and give some much more incentives than the regular one. Who is easy to dismiss? For example, the general director. Yeah, just by resolution of the shareholders, a general director can be reappointed from one day to the other. Then, of course, you still have the employment-related issue, where because that's a separate procedure, where you have to dismiss in a way that is appropriate and according to the labor code. Usually, this will include at least 3 months of salaries that have to be paid in such a case. There's another, for example, right now, very interesting as with regard to the yesterday's decree of the Moscow mayor. We know that by the ukaz of the president of the Russian Federation, we have non-working days with continued salary until May 11. From May 12, we still have the self-isolation regime in Moscow, and that means some people cannot go to work, but it's not announced non-working days. So what to do in that case? If you still have the people, then you can announce, for example, idle time, which will oblige the employer to pay 2/3 of the salaries to those employees, or again initiate the procedure of staff reduction, which requires certain compliance with procedures which are quite time intensive, quite document intensive. So it will be required to spend a lot of time and resources in order to get the setting. So the usual way of regulating things would be to find a mutual agreement with the employee in order to settle out, or to find a solution to still keep the people on board, but for example, reduce salary for a certain time, again, by way of mutual agreement. So what we usually recommend is to find a solution that is a compromise that let both parties also, let's say, continue to be in touch. And you may also not want to dismiss these people because it will not that easy once we get out of this situation to get the good people on board again. So you might think of a solution that allows to keep them, for example, temporary salary reduction by way of mutual agreement. But again, it's all a question about finding a compromise. And if that is not possible, there are still certain instruments which can be escalated in different, let's say, scenarios according to the Russian labor code. Next question.
Marco, please check your sound settings.
Is it working now?
Thanks. Yes.
Thanks. I'm sorry for that. So the question is, can we travel or can't we travel? Currently, the borders are closed with some exceptions. One exception is, so that means that no American employee can come to Russia. From a Russian point of view, currently Russians are not allowed to go abroad except diplomats and the kind of things. And another exception is if you are holding a double citizenship, then you can leave the country. So the answer to this question is, as long as you don't have Russian engineers that carry a double residency, double citizenship, these Russian engineers cannot go to the US on site training. That's the short answer to this question. Currently, movement between borders are super restricted. In addition, you have always applied the quarantine rules going out. You have to sit 14 days, or you carry on COVID anti-genome test, which is not older than 60 hours or so. And if you go back to Russian, even it is in theory possibly the same applies. Either you carry the COVID test with you, or you go straight into 14 days in quarantine. So next question, please.
So, German producer of equipment who wishes to bring a truck from Germany to Russia under a contract with a Russian customer. Currently, everything is running fine at the customs border, so trucks can pass, and we are not aware of any issues. Therefore, currently we do not see any problem. What happens if a problem occurs? Of course, when a problem occurs and trucks are no further passed, then of course the question is this subject to force majeure? And as you know from many seminars, just that something does not work in the current time does not mean that it's force majeure. It always have to be checked. What happened? What was the reason for the non-performance, and what the supplier may have done to overcome the situation? Were there any possibilities? Could he also have foreseen the situation? Is this something what he already knew a week before? And all these issues. So what can currently be said? Currently everything is fine. Currently no issues. If an issue occurs, then it must be checked what the reason for the issue was, and whether it could have been foreseen or not. So that's currently the situation, and that's our answer to this question. Next question, please. That's a German mid-sized production company with. And the question in this structure is it possible to get state support? You of course know that there is a good chance for SMEs to get state support. An SME is at first a Russian company with a turnover, with an annual profit not exceeding 2 billion rubles and not having an average personnel account of 250 employees, and such a company may apply for being registered as an SME, and if this company is held by more than 49% by a foreign legal entity, the meeting of the requirements by the Russian legal entity is not sufficient. In this event, if 49% or more are held by a non-Russian company, also the non-Russian company must meet the requirements, which means that also the foreign shareholder may not have an annual profit exceeding 2 billion rubles and personnel of not more than 250 employees. So it's more difficult to become acknowledged as an SME. What can be done? Of course, the foreign shareholder may think of limiting the size of its shares in the Russian OO. There are a number of possibilities how this can be done. I think what the easiest would be is that the shares will be sold. Some of the shares will be sold to another company. This is something which may help. Although on the other hand, I think what should be taken into account in the current situation it will be in any event not very easy to get any governmental support in the given situation. And I'm also sure that the current situation is not something which will last eternally. So in general, I would warn now, restructure a company in order to meet SME requirements, as in any event, it will be difficult to get financial governmental support, and we have a situation which will change soon. So in general, I would not go this way. I would not restructure if you're not meeting the requirements. I think usually this is something which should be accepted. Thank you. Next question, please.
So this is in straightforward. In addition to our question number 6, how does the application for an SME is working if it is controlled by a foreign company? With the legal some sort of observations from my colleague. So how this works? You have if you want to apply for the status of the Russian companies to be incorporated in the register, the Russian supposed to be SME has engaged certified Russian auditor. The certified Russian auditor then certifies the fact that the shareholder, the foreign shareholder, also falls under the Russian criteria of an SME. You have heard the numbers for 2 billion rubles and not more than 250 employees. You have to convert, if it is a foreign shareholder, you have to convert supposedly your foreign income revenue into rubles. Presumably you will not use the as of, so end of the year date, you will use an average for the year exchange rate in order to convert your foreign, say, euro revenue into rubles revenue. This is first part. So and then there is a little bit of tricky time window which applies currently only for foreign controlled SMEs. So this Russian certified auditor has only between the 1st and the 5th July time to electronically file the certification that the foreign shareholder is also an SME as per Russian legislation. Then you will grant it a decision to become an SME at least by the 10th of August. And then there was some clarification this week that the status applies then if it is granted as of. That means, say you get your decision at the 5th of August, then you are an SME as of the date of the registration, in that case 5th of August. So all the subsidies which we have currently in place for anti-COVID crisis are then applicable to you as of this date. The status will not granted retrogradely back, say, to 1st of January 2020. And then if you are an SME, in addition, you have to certify the fact that your shareholder is an SME based on the Russian legislation. You have to certify this via any Russian certified auditor once a year. Also, you apply for the confirmation of the status each year in this time window I've mentioned between 1st and 5th July. So this is how this currently works in practice for foreign companies to get the Russian water company on the list of SMEs. Another technical sidestep which is currently open. Thomas already mentioned the issue with majorities and kind of thing. Another critical criteria is if you have a group of companies and within the group of companies, they're setting up a holding, and the holding holds the Russian company. So the holding per se has no income, has no people. So this is obviously an SME. The question is, via this structuring, do you bypass the legislation? This is currently open. If you set it up that way, then the substance versus form approach does not work. So the Russian authorities will look only on the holding GmbH or substance over form. That means you have to file for the consolidated financial information of the whole group, which normally would put most of the say, even if this is German Mittelstand, out of the SME status for the Russian daughter company. But this is an open point. There's no practice currently, and therefore no answers to that. So next question, please.
May I step in, Marco? Sorry, I've just looked into the chat, and there's the question asked to us. If there is if there is a Russian company meeting the SME requirements, having 100% foreign shareholder, but it does not have the official SME status. Has such a company the chance to get any support as an SME? My first view, Marco, but you may correct me, my first view is not. If you want to get support as an SME from the Russian authorities, you must be registered as an SME. Otherwise, you will not get the support. But Marco, you may correct me.
No, that's completely correct. In addition, an exit may or may not is you are not an SME, but you are working in the heavily affected industry sectors, one of these 10 heavily affected industry sectors, because the legislation for tax referrals and tax installments that are based on criteria of indicators, is this called, whether or not you are losing profit and revenue compared to the quotas, the same quota in 2019, then you still can get tax deferrals and tax installments. If you are either heavily affected industry sector working, or you are a strategic relevant company, which obviously somewhat is a contradiction adjective. You cannot be a small and medium enterprise and significant for the economy of the Russian Federation. But if you are working in heavily affected industry, then you still you have access to the tax deferral and tax installment legislation subsidy that is based on the order of the government 40434 from the 4th of April. Again, a link to our last week's webinar, where you have all the legislation and all the criteria for tax deferrals and tax installments item by item listed. So next question, please. Is it an ideal situation for expansion by taking over a competitor or supplier? How can a reliable value the price of the target company? Is a good question indeed. And the answer is definitely yes. It is all the rich people make the fortune in times of crisis, as we know. So if you want to buy a market share and you can afford it, then it's a good time to do that. There are a lot of competitors in financial somewhat distress or constraint and or cash short, and if you play that smart, you can currently acquire assets or targets very cheap. That's true. The second is, how can a reliable value the price of the target company? This is relates to the question, what kind of financial model you use. If you value a company, what is one indicator is if you use a discount method, and you use a discount rate, and all the risk-related factors that are implied into the discount rate obviously elevated currently. It is the country risk, it is the industry risk. Presumably, you will have an additional markup for the current crisis. So that said is that to get a certain amount of payback, then the underlying income that is going to be discounted is presumably higher, or if it is the same, then because of the increased discount rate and the net value of whatever your valuation is decreased. But in principle, if you have free cash and you see a competitor in financial constraint, it is indeed now a good time to pick up assets and to buy market share cheap, or cheaper as it was several months before. So this next question, please.
Yeah, Marco, I would second that with regard to the last questions, especially if you look at the ruble devaluation, then in euro, it might be very attractive to enter and to get a piece of the market here. So if we speak about financing and cash flow, so what are the best short-term financing options if we speak as a Russian subsidiary to get from the headquarter or external, which require minimum paperwork and time? So we know there are several options how to finance a Russian subsidiary. It could be done via an increase of the charter capital, for example. But we know that increasing the charter capital requires a shareholder resolution. Then this needs to be registered. Then the money needs to be transferred. So several steps involved, which are, again, I would say not too much paper intensive, but they require certain paperwork. They require state registration procedures, and this already makes it a bit of a hurdle if you want to do it quick. What is very popular is loan financing. Yeah, so if the headquarter gives a loan to the subsidiary, usually that requires again the loan agreement. Then it requires involvement of the bank, and again the transfer of the money itself. What is very popular and goes very quick and requires really a minimum amount of paperwork and time is a contribution to the capital. It's actually just a capital infusion and a mere bank transfer. So it's a shareholder resolution, which does not need to be registered. So it doesn't require necessarily notarization, apostille, and so on. And then as a shareholder from the headquarter, you transfer the money via bank. And that money lands on the account of the subsidiary and it can be used. So that's very popular and requires minimum paperwork. Of course, if we speak about external financing, then it's a little bit reduced, the options. You cannot make just a capital infusion as a shareholder, of course, in that case. Then you will require mostly loan financing or any other options of financing that allow to short-term bridge any financial needs that are required.
So, what is the current cost of financing? What are the lowest interest rate for intercompany loans? What is the current cost of financing depends on whether or not you can participate in one of the current state loan programs that I have already mentioned. If you can, then the current cost of financing is 6%. But this means that you legally can apply because you are an SME or you are in one of the heavily affected industries. Then you can apply for this loan, for the 6% loans. What is the lowest interest rate for intercompany loans? This is more related question to taxation, because intercompany loans are based on the foreign controlled company legislation in Russia, a little bit tricky because you have to apply in certain corridors, and if you're over the corridor, then the part that is exceeding is a deemed dividend. So if you pay an interest, then one part is a tax-deductible interest and one part is a non-tax-deductible deemed interest. What is the lowest interest rate currently? I would guess, the best suggestion is what is currently banking offering risk surcharge over the refinancing rate of the Central Bank of the Russian Federation, which is 6.5% currently. So any interest rate 10% plus minus 2% is presumably a good indication that interest rate of intercompany loans is at arm's length. That means unrelated third party would have entered into such a credit loan agreement with the daughter company in Russia for the same interest rate. So the lowest is presumably somewhere between 8 and the highest presumably somewhere around 12% per anno in foreign currency, not in ruble. So that's the question, the answer to question number 10. Next question, please. It is for Thomas, I believe. Or for Alexis.
No, it's for me. It's for me. Sorry, I've
Okay.
definitely. Yeah. What must be done if the company probably faces insolvency? I think the first question is, of course, is your company a company which falls under the insolvency moratorium? If it is, then you can just do nothing. You can just wait because the moratorium says that the debtor is not obliged to file an insolvency application within the time of the moratorium. But the question is, of course, if you're not falling under the moratorium, what happens then? If you're not falling under the moratorium, then the general rules of the Russian law on bankruptcy apply. And these rules say that the general director is obliged under certain circumstances to file an insolvency application. There are 5 criteria mentioned in the law. Most important criteria are the satisfaction of claims of one creditor or several creditors may not be fulfilled, or it will be difficult to fulfill them. That's one important criteria. The enforcement of claims against the debtor will significantly hamper the pursuit of the debtor's business activity or make it impossible. That's another important criterion. Or the debtor shows signs of inability to pay debts and or insufficiency of debts to settle claims of the creditors, or claims of employees or further employees of the debtor have not been settled for more than 3 months as a result of the financial shortage. If one of these criteria applies, the general director is obliged to file an insolvency application. The court practice, must be said, regarding the application of the criteria is not very consistent or clear. What is most commonly said in court decisions is that there is a ground to file an insolvency application if the amounts of debts is greater than the value of the assets, or that the courts cannot clearly assess whether there are debts which are overdue or not. And in these situations, the court may say, yes, there is a reason to file for bankruptcy. On the other hand, the court says that the CEO is not obliged to file for bankruptcy procedure as long as it may reasonably believe that the company may satisfy the creditor's claims. So this is in principle a mixture of the grounds when the CEO must apply for bankruptcy. the situation for the CEO in this situation is not easy, because on the one hand, the criteria are not very clearly defined. And on the other hand, there's an obligation of the CEO not to file for bankruptcy as long as he is able to fulfill all obligations of the company. Because if the CEO applies for bankruptcy, although the company is able to perform its obligation, it also breaches its obligations. So the CEO is in a pretty uncomfortable sandwich situation. It must always have an eye on the financial situation of the company. As long as the company may fulfill obligations, it must not file for bankruptcy. But if any of the criteria applies, it is obliged to file for bankruptcy. And if one of the criteria applies, it has 30 days time, it has a month's time, to file the application. The application must be filed with the relevant arbitration court of Russia. So what we can recommend in the current situation is always have a look, have a steady look, have a regular look on the finances of the company. And if you see that one of the criteria is fulfilled, then decide to file for bankruptcy. Then this must be done. As long as it is not the case, just continue to observe the situation and be prepared to quickly react to a worsening of the situation of the company. That's for question 11.
So I think we are at the end of the list of our questions that we have prepared for you, some sort of frequent answered questions. Please feel free to drop us now in the chat questions that are not covered, any problems that you have that we can answer on now during the webinar. Please feel free to write them down now and we try to answer them. So somebody's writing something. So, can a rep of, so the question is, can a rep office of a German company apply for an office rent reduction? Yes, you can. You always can. The question is presumably a little bit more complicated than it sounds, because what you mean presumably can I enforce a rent reduction rather than negotiate a rent reduction, because you can always negotiate a rent reduction, and if you have a reasonable landlord currently you will receive a rent reduction. If your landlord is the city of Moscow, then you presumably cannot, based on the anti-crisis program of the city of Moscow, apply for a rent reduction, because you are not an SME, not a small company. You are rep offices, and in the poor sense, representation office, which does not carry any business. So you are, from that perspective, presumably excluded from the list of companies that get any subsidy from the state.
Yeah, I also I would like to propose to answer this question finally offline, because indeed the question is what the concrete situation is, what is subject of the rent and so on and so on. In general, my view would be that a rep office, if it satisfies our requirements may apply for the rent reduction, but of course it must satisfy the requirements. This is something which I would like to propose to discuss offline. One general further remark is that the Supreme Court of the Russian Federation just issued a further overview on clarifications on measures in connection with the virus, and it said that lessees may enforce their right of rent reduction if the lessor does not agree to a reasonable rent reduction. So the highest court, the Supreme Court of the Russian Federation, strengthens the situation of the lessee. But again, regarding the rep office question and regarding the rent, I kindly ask you, just let us have a further look at the situation offline.
Okay, there's another question coming up. Okay. No. Okay. I think there are no, as far as I can see, no additional questions. Okay, so then if there are no any further questions, then I thank my colleagues very much. I thank you for hearing. I thank my colleagues for contributing. Webinar is always for 1 hour. Now we are 59 minutes in, so right on spot. Thank you very much for listening. And again, for all questions related to normative acts that are mentioned, please go to our website. You find it there. And in addition, feel free to contact us directly if you have any question. We are ready to help you. Thank you very much indeed, and stay healthy and stay safe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.